This is Kiwin Tech. My name is Niyama, the instructor. So today we have something nice that we are bringing on our channel. That is generation of computers. So the evolution of computers is a fascinating journey marked by significant technological advancement. So many things have gone into it. But to better understand the progression, computers are often categorized into generations based on the underlying technology used by them. But someone may ask, okay, so what is the generation of computers? So we can just say it refers to the specific period in the history of computing. So it refers to the specific period in the history of computing. So you know what? Typically, computers are divided into 5 generations, which is the first generation computers, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and then we have the fifth generation. So we don't want to waste much time. We want to dive into the first part, which is the first generation. So you know what you are supposed to do. You can take your time and put down some good points that can help you to understand this generation of computers very well. So let's dive into our course. So first generation computers. In our course today, what are we going to learn? We are going to see the history of the first generation computers. We are going to talk about the examples of the first generation computers. We are going to talk about the characteristics of first generation computers, some of the characters that we will be seeing in first generation computers. And then we will talk about some key points about the first generation computers. Then we come to the challenges of the first generation computers. So let's move. Now this is the history of the first generation computer. Look at how big it is. So look at it very well. So this one is the era of the first generation computers. That is from 1946 to 1959. So look at this first generation computer very well, which is the ENIAC. And that is the world's first electronic large-scale general-purpose digital computer. So this is what we call computer in the 1940s, 1950s. That is what we call a computer. But you know, things are changing. But still, let's talk about the first generation computers. Let's move. But before this era, some mechanical calculators were in use. So we know from the beginning we talk about computing. Computing means to calculate something. So people were able to create so many mechanical calculators that helps them in their work that they are doing. And we have some of them. We have abacus here. We have Pascal's calculator. We have the stepped reckoner. And then we have the arithmometer. That's also there in 1820. And then we have the comptometer and then comptograph. That's it. And then we have the difference engine, which is brought in around 1822. And then we have the analytical engine. And then the last part that we have here is the millionaire. That one came in 1893. So we could see all these things are mechanical calculators used by scientists to do so many things. So that helped in bringing about the first generation computers. So we move. But what was the purpose of the first generation computer? What's the purpose? It was designed for calculation, for storing data, and for controlling so many things, so many devices by then. But you know, there are some applications of that first generation computers. What were they developed to do? What was the main purpose for creating that first generation computer? So the first one, we have some 4 bulletin points over there. The first point says to handle complex mathematical computations required for scientific research. So the scientists were the ones who were using it for mathematical computations. You know, that is the work of the computer. Then secondly, to help scientists to handle complex engineering projects and military applications. So we'll be asking ourselves, so during the 1940s, 1950s, scientists were still doing so many things. What helped them? So that is what we are learning today, that the first generation computers were the ones that helped them to handle these complex engineering projects. What other thing? The large volumes of data for businesses. So we could see that in those times there were businesses that were going on by then, although they were doing fine, but they couldn't store so much data like that. And most of them were using the paper based. They were just writing things on paper. So they find out that no, if we create something like this, we can save so much data on it. So that was the main purpose. And then one purpose is to process large volumes of data for big government agencies. So these are some four purposes of the first generation computers. But note, there is some note here. Some first generation computers like the Colossus were instrumental in breaking enemy codes during the World War. So machines were created already to break enemy codes, to break codes already, and now we are having so many computers that can be used in doing these programming languages and so on and so forth. There are a lot of them, but here today we are talking about the Colossus. So if you have time, you can even go onto Google and search for Colossus and read more about it and see how they were used by the soldiers to break these enemy codes. You can see them very well. So we have to do more research and get more things about the Colossus. And the first generation computers were the ones that laid the groundwork for the rapid advancements that followed. So they were the one, like if you want to build a house, you have to dig foundation, you have to put up a foundation, put in some blocks, get the foundation very strong before you can put up the building. So the first generation computers were the ones that laid the groundwork for the rapid advancements that followed. And we know from first generation we move on to second generation, third, fourth, and now we are using the fifth generation and so on and so forth. So it has helped us a lot because they were the main ones that laid the groundwork. If not because of first generation computers, I don't think we'll be having any computer by then or by now. What were the things that were used in the first generation computers? They were so large. So let's go back and look at our diagram again. Look at the diagram. It's so large that sometimes you'll be asking yourself, so what do they use in making all these things? So that is what we are seeing here. The vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes. They were the ones that were used to create these first generation computers. And we could see how large they are. They are very large. That is why we see the first generation computer very big, because the devices or the things that are supposed to use were supposed to use in it, the components that were supposed to be used in those first generation computers, they were very big. So look at the first diagram at your extreme left. Look at it very well. You see this is the vacuum tube. Look at the things that were used in that. The glass envelope, we could see the plates, the tube terminals, and we could see some batteries that were used by then. We could see the filament in it, the grid. And look at one typical example of it is at the right top. We see it over there. We have so many different types. Look at them. They are so big that when you are using these things to create a machine like first generation computer, it will be big. And this is how they operate. When you see, you will see it here. So how vacuum tubes work. So the glass tube that we are seeing over there is the one that will be evacuated to create the vacuum, creating some space over there. And then inside the tube are some electrodes, including the cathode. The cathode is the one that is going to emit the electrons, and an anode, which collects electrons. And they said when those things are heated, the cathode releases some electrons, and that is what is going to help us to get our voltage or our current. So the application of the voltage between the cathode and the anode accelerates the electrons, and then they create the what? Electric current. So we see how vacuum tubes work very well. Now we want to move on to some of the examples of the first generation computers. And the main one that was brought out first is the ENIAC. The ENIAC, ENIAC. So it means electronic numerical integrator and computer. And this computer, this nice project, or this nice computer was built by John Presper Eckert and then John V. Mockley. So these two people were the ones who brought up the idea, and then they were able to do something nice and brought out something like this. So the ENIAC was the first one that was created, which is the electronic numerical integrator and computer. And we know it is very, very large. And how many vacuum tubes does this machine contains? Contains 18,000 vacuum tubes. So imagine the vacuum tubes that we talked about, big like that, and then they need 18,000 of them before they can create a machine. So imagine the machine will be very, very big. So the first generation computer, which is the ENIAC, is a very big machine. What about the other one that we have? That is the EDVAC, electronic discrete variable automatic computer. Look at how complex this machine is. Ask yourself, who designed this machine? So the one who designed this machine, the name is von Neumann. So we can keep that, or we can write this somewhere. Von Neumann. He was the one who created the EDVAC. What other machine do we have? UNIVAC, which is the Universal Automatic Computer. So these two people were the same persons that developed this machine, which is John Presper Eckert and then John V. Mockley. They did this machine in 1952. Look at the computer very well. So you could see that the first generation, which is the ENIAC, is very big, but they sat down and they thought about it, and they know that no, we have to do something so that we can bring the computer down to our level, to a little smaller size, so that they can be able to use it very well. And this is what they were able to develop. As you can see in the picture, it's a very nice machine by then, but now we are using different ones. So but this one is very nice, which is the UNIVAC, Universal Automatic Computer. Let's see, we have another one too here, which is the IBM 701, which is the International Business Machine 701. Who manufactured this nice first generation computer here? The manufacturers were IBM, but who developed it? Who brought the idea? We have Jeria Haddad and then Nathaniel Rochester. There were these two people who developed and brought out the idea before IBM was able to manufacture these machines for them. But I know one thing that we can keep in our mind. IBM's 701 is an electronic data processing machine. Electronic data processing machine. And it is used by just one particular group of people, which is the United States Air Force. And they use it for what? Scientific purposes. For doing their calculations, for doing breaking their codes, the enemy codes, and so on and so on. This is what they were using by then. IBM 701, which was manufactured by the IBM, which is the International Business Machine. And then the developers were Jeria Haddad and then Nathaniel Rochester. Now, what are some of the characteristics of first generation computers? What were used by then? Vacuum tubes were used for what? The circuits. And then it uses magnetic drums as its memory. What about the size? It is very large in size because it is going to use about 18,000 vacuum tubes to create one of them. So we know it can fill an entire room. But it is very, very slow compared to modern computers. Yes, it will be, because the modern computers we have now are very, very fast. And one thing about these first generation computers, they consume higher electricity. And those things lead to frequent overheating. What about their input and output devices? We know for now we use the input and output devices like mouse, keyboard, and so on and so forth. And then we have our monitor, which is our output device, and we have projectors, we have printers, we have a whole lot which are input and output devices. But those times they use the punch cards and then the paper tape as their input and output devices. As the class moves on, I'll teach you what a punch card is and what a paper tape is. We will see the difference between them and what they are really used for. And because of the number of vacuum tubes used in these first generation computers, most of them they break down, because when one vacuum tube fails, that means the whole system will go off. So we could see how bad that time was. But now things have changed and then we are moving on. So what are some of the challenges in the first generation computers? What do we see? What are some of the challenges? Although they were trying their best to create something, but there were so many breakdowns due to the vacuum tube failures. And that alone reduced the productivity. A lot of people were not buying those machines because it is very difficult to create. And when one vacuum tube fails, the whole machine doesn't work again. It's a whole lot. So there was no productivity with that. And the machine language programming was time consuming and error prone because a lot of programmers were not around. People don't know the machine language very well. So they were trying their best to fix or do something, get something going, but it was not working. And the other one is it was primarily used for scientific calculations and data processing. That was the only thing those first generation computers were used for. Unlike what we are using now that we can use to do so many things, but for them they were used to do only two things: scientific calculations and then data processing. And what else? They are very big in size, very, very big in size. So they are extremely expensive because you need more money before you can purchase something like this. Because we need about 18,000 vacuum tubes to do one particular machine. So we could see it will be very expensive because even by then vacuum tubes were not something common that when you go to the market you get it. No, you won't get it like that. So here we can see that yes, it will be extremely expensive by then. 1940s, 1950s, it will be very expensive. So here, our next thing that we'll be talking about is the second generation computers. So what have we learned today? We've come to talk about our first generation computers. We know some of the characteristics of first generation computers, and we've talked about the ENIAC, the EDVAC, the UNIVAC. We've talked about some types of first generation computers. Our next topic will be the second generation computers. So stay tuned for the next video so that you can watch and see second generation computers, diagrams, and how they operate, the things that were used in second generation computers. We are going to talk about all of them in our next video. So stay tuned. The video will come very soon. So you know what you are supposed to do. This is Kiwin Tech. You need to subscribe, like,